Hi, my name is Tyler Throckmorton. This is As You Like It by William Shakespeare and the Roaring Girl by Middleton and Decker, a presentation on gender fluidity. So, for the thesis, the era in which both As You Like It by William Shakespeare and Middleton and Decker's The Roaring Girl viewed gender in a somewhat rigid frame. Men were able to do as they pleased and were defined as they saw fit, whereas women were supposed to be subservient to men and remain good and proper housewives. During the time in which the plays took place, gender was linked directly to a person's sex, but fluidity was able to be achieved and accepted if one dressed and behaved like the opposite sex. By acting as the opposite sex, each of the heroines within their respective stories are able to break from their societal limitations as females and act freely. The gender fluidity displayed within both plays goes on to grossly highlight the major inequalities between both males and females during society in the 1600s. So, gender fluidity within As You Like It. As You Like It follows Rosaline through her journey of love. She is able to transcend her gender barriers and get closer to Orlando through the act of cross dressing. Cross dressing is when a person dresses like the opposite sex to give the appearance that they are that sex or that they identify with that sex. In a conversation with Celia, Rosaline says, "We'll have a swashing and a marshal outside, as many other mannish cowards have that do outface it with their semblances." Rosaline is describing how changing her appearance will give off the impression that she is just as fearsome as other men. By changing her appearance and assuming the alter ego of Ganymede, she can attempt to get to know Orlando better. John E. Howard, writer for the Oxford Press and author of Theatre and Gender Struggle in Early Modern England, writes that doing so does not release Rosaline from patriarchy, but reveals the constructed nature of patriarchy's representations of the feminine, and shows a woman manipulating those representations in her own interests, theatricalizing, for her own purposes, what is assumed to be innate, teaching her future mate how to get beyond certain ideologies of gender to more enabling ones. So, how does Rosaline use gender fluidity and how is she viewed for it? Howard goes on to describe how manipulating the appearance of Rosaline is able to change others around her and their affective um, way they perceive her. The initial interaction of character changes, and therefore scenes within the play out drastically differently. By changing her appearance from Rosaline to Ganymede, she is able to help Orlando become comfortable with expressing himself to her, and then he is able to get over his love for the real Rosaline. Despite this, she finds that Orlando actually is truly in love with her, and in the end, Rosaline is accepted for who she is and ultimately achieves her final goal of making Orlando fall in love with her. And when she reveals herself, she doesn't seem to receive much judgment for the fluidity of her gender and gets away with the act altogether, which gives off the impression that gender switching was acceptable during that time. So, gender fluidity and being personally free. Rosaline is also able to change her personality as Ganymede. She can shed the formalities as a woman and speak her mind in any fashion that she chooses. Um, this freedom allows her to talk to Orlando as a fellow man and understand him in a much more personal way. By being fluid with her gender, Rosaline is able to experience things in the way in which two males would interact with each other. And when Orlando speaks to Ganymede, he allows himself to be himself and exposes his innermost feelings that he might not tell a woman. Orlando says, "I am he that is so love-shaked. I pray you tell me your remedy." When Orlando says this, he's basically asking a fellow man, who he thinks is a man, for help, which he would definitely not do if he was talking to Rosaline himself. And Shakespeare seems to be making a major commentary on gender within the constructs of society. And he uses Ganymede to exploit how people change their demeanor and their entire personality around the opposite sex. The play also serves as a commentary on female oppression and the sheer difference between personal freedoms between men and women during the time period. So, gender fluidity within the Roaring Girl. Mal Frith, who is the main character, is able to shed the constraints she is placed under as a woman by cross dressing. Unlike Rosaline, she does not try to pass herself off as a man, but rather seems to almost remain gender neutral by adopting a man's wardrobe and attitude, but still remaining a woman within her society. So Molly, or Mary Frith, was a notorious pickpocket within London, and this way of life may have also helped contribute to her decision to disguise herself and wear a traditional man's garb. Um, Susan E. Krantz, a writer for JSTOR, which is an academic library, and the author of Renaissance and Reformation, writes that Moll Cutpurse dramatically demonstrates the insufficiency of gender categories both within the Roaring Girl and in her life. The fictional Moll's sex or gender ambiguity is explored through the distinct sexual identities and is further complicated through her heroic personality. Ultimately, the playwrights replace negative social readings of Moll's sexuality with a positive ideal, albeit an incomplete one. When the real Moll appeared on stage in the play, she is not only usurped by the male's prerogative, she is also rejected by her fictional rehabilitation. And through her overtly sexual language, her cross-gender performance, and her transvestite costume, she recuperated transgression as a social signifier. So, gender commentary within the Roaring Girl. So Krantz makes an interesting point as she points out how Moll's cross-dressing seemed to oppose some of her more feminine or sexual qualities. And Moll is able to be extremely fluid with her gender identity, and basically by dressing as a male, she allows herself to act and express herself more freely. And Krantz is basically saying that the male prerogative is able to supersede Moll when he comes on stage, and this kind of points out that there's still this distinct divide between male and female importance within society. And it goes on to show that even though Moll may dress as a man, she is still oppressed because she is born as the female sex. But it lets the audience empathize with her more. And in Act 2, Moll says, "I have the head now of myself, and am man enough for a woman. Marriage is but a chopping and a changing, where a maiden loses one's head, worse if replaced." And the comment allows the audience to get a glimpse of how Moll views gender roles, because we can safely say that Moll is probably somewhat of a gender fluid person as she demonstrates throughout the play, and so it kind of helps us understand how someone from that background perceives both the role of a man and a woman, and how she perceives marriage within that society. So, Moll beats discrimination. So in the story, Moll is basically able to help Sebastian marry who he wanted to marry, which was Mary Fitzlord, and Moll is able to basically allow Sir Alexander to accept Sebastian's choice. During the entire play, Moll faces a lot of scrutiny, and she's able to show how selfless she is in the face of all of this. And throughout the story, we as the audience get an idea for how those in society who didn't choose to conform to the gender norms were treated. And we can get a glimpse of that through what Sir Alexander says at the end of the play, when he says, "Cast from the jaws of envy and her people, and nothing foul but that. I'll never more condemn by common voice, for that's the whore that deceives man's opinion, mocks his trust, cozen's his love, and makes his heart unjust." And basically what he's saying is that he judged Moll for how she appeared and how rumors spread about her without actually understanding who she was first. And I think this is part of the reason that she had the idea to dress in this man's garb, because she doesn't want to be perceived just based off of looks or perceived based off of the fact that she's a female. And I think that that is a big thing within um, the kind of 1600 society and even up to today's time. And Sir Alexander kind of helps to demonstrate just how hard it was to be gender fluid or part of the LGBT community and during those times, and helps to show just how many in society would just label Maul or those like her just because of the way they decide to live their lives. So, in conclusion, in the end, both Maul and Rosaline were able to achieve what they both set out to do. By dressing up as the opposite gender and acting as a man, both of these women were able to exercise a higher right of personal freedom than they would if they stayed as a woman and conformed to societal gender roles. Both plays demonstrated great inequality between both males and females within the time period, and highlight how trapped women were at the time and how little freedom they had to express themselves. However, in the end, despite all the gross uh, inadequacies of the male and female gender and gender fluidity, um, they were accepted by all of those around them, just based on probably how selfless they were and the message that both the playwrights were trying to get across. And so I think that both the plays were able to speak to the audience and kind of demonstrate that it was hard to be gender fluid during the time, and that in a non-play setting, things might not have ended so well. In my opinion, I feel like the plays have to end in a sort of happy comedic way, just because that's how they were both written. But had it been a real situation, things perhaps would have been different and would have played out kind of similar to how Maul was treated during her entire run through the midsection of the play. So that was my presentation, and here's my works cited page. Thank you for listening.